Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the first Second Tuesday video recording in the 2022 to 23 school year. I'm Mary Thyssen-Milder, and I'm the Physical Education Consultant at the Minnesota Department of Education. This presentation is a product of the Professional Development Plan designed by the Minnesota Department of Education's Physical Education Leadership Team, made up of state leaders in physical education from the Minnesota Society of Health and Physical Educators, or MnSHAPE, representatives of Minnesota Developmental Adaptive Physical Education, or MnDAPE, the co-chairs of the Physical Education Standards Committee, and higher education. This presentation serves as a review of all the standard implementation concepts covered so far in our training and videos. Each slide identifies a key question followed by the answer. The first question is, why do we have standards? Our physical education standards are a means to ensure that all students have an equal opportunity to learn the knowledge and skills that are foundational for our students. They provide a clear picture for teaching and learning by identifying essential outcomes for all students to achieve by the end of a grade level, grade band, or course. This word cloud is a great visual that identifies the key concepts in our professional development process. Next question, where did our standards come from? The 2018 Minnesota Academic Standards in Physical Education were developed by physical educators from across the state. The Minnesota legislature directed MDE to adopt and adapt the most recent version of the SHAPE America Standards and Outcomes with the guidelines that we would maintain the integrity of the national standards. Our document consists of grade level benchmarks laid out in learning progressions at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. The document also includes 3 appendixes, a glossary of terms, descriptions of activity categories, and critical element descriptions. When are the standards to be implemented? Originally, our standards were to be implemented by the 2021 to 22 school year. However, due to the pandemic, the Minnesota legislature delayed full implementation until the 2022 to 23 school year. Does MDE have an implementation assistance plan for the physical education standards? Yes. This slide identifies the key topics in that plan. Are the professional development topics available online? Yes. Our first year professional development allowed us to offer face-to-face workshops in regions across the state. When the pandemic interrupted those trainings, videos were created to highlight the key concept in the topics covered in the first 2 years of professional development. This slide identifies those topics. They can be accessed at both the MnSHAPE and MDE websites, which I will show you in a few slides. Is there professional development plan for the 2022-23 school year? Yes, this slide identifies the release dates and the topics to be addressed. Our focus today is to try and bring everyone up to speed by providing a brief overview of what has been covered to date to ensure we can move forward on a level playing field. This video is the first in a series of Second Tuesday releases. Now let me take a minute to show you these resources web pages that are available on both the MDE and MnSHAPE websites. This is the MnSHAPE webpage. On this page, you can see where all the videos are available here and the dates of all of our new videos that to be released. They will be released and put in blue boxes here. The first series of snapshots are available here through academic language and bundling, and then this is the second year. If you go to the top of the page on the MnSHAPE page, there's this button on MDE Updates. This is the video section. If you go to the handout section, these are the handouts that were available for the workshops that we had. And I will be addressing some of these handouts throughout this presentation. This is the Minnesota Department of Education Physical Education webpage. On this webpage, we have the standards themselves, what all the requirements are, what the standards look like, some of the designed sample assessments, and then again, the videos and the video links. For implementation handouts, there's a specific page you can go to that's marked the Physical Education Standards Implementation page. If you click on that button, these are all of the handouts and the documents available around physical education implementation. These were also available on the MnShape pages. These include the standards themselves, a scope and sequence, the benchmark focus areas, the standards broken down by grade level, the sample assessments themselves, and then documents that give you activities for understanding the implementation process. Now let's go back to our presentation. Is there a clear delineation of responsibilities for standard implementation between what the state does and what the local school districts do? Yes, it is the responsibility of the state to facilitate the development of the standards and grade level benchmarks and design an implementation plan to assist districts in their adoption process. As Minnesota is a local control state, the Minnesota Department of Education does not decide on curriculum. Rather, it's up to local school districts to decide what materials to use to meet the required standards and benchmarks. Physical educators align curriculum, instruction, and assessment to the knowledge and skills outlined in the standards through achievable benchmarks that provide a pathway from kindergarten through high school. Are there general steps that are taken during the standard adoption process at the local level? Yes. This graphic is an example of a standard implementation process. The actual steps that you or your districts go through may look similar or slightly different, but this diagram gives us a sense of everything that should be happening in standards-based curriculum instruction development. The standard implementation process is fluid. It ebbs and flows under different conditions, often cycles in a process of continuous improvement, and is not always linear. How many physical education standards are there? The MDE Standards Development Committee adopted the standards from Shape America as they were written. These 5 standards establish the overall goals for student learning and are repeated from kindergarten through grade 12 and are called anchor standards. Standard 1 is our motor skill development standard. Standard 2 is the application of knowledge to movement and performance. The focus of Standard 3 is a demonstration of knowledge and skills in maintaining health-enhancing levels of physical activity and fitness. Standard 4 is about exhibiting responsible personal and social behavior. And Standard 5 is for students to recognize the value of physical activity for health, enjoyment, challenge, self-expression, and social interaction. How does the emphasis of the standards differ at the elementary to the middle to the high school level? At the elementary level, grades K to 5, benchmarks relate to the development of fundamental skills. These form the building blocks for gameplay, physical activity, and fitness in the middle school and high school standards. Critical elements are emphasized in motor skills, which identify key concepts that can be observed in movement efficiency. Middle school is the transition level from isolated skills and knowledge learned in elementary school to the application of them. The focus is on categories of games such as an invasion games, net and wall games, target or field and striking games. Competition in each area is de-emphasized and gaining personal competence is stressed. This leads to more of an emphasis on practice tasks and small-sided games. High school is the lifelong utilization stage. Benchmarks at the high school level reflect the minimum knowledge and skills students must have to be college or career ready at graduation. There's less emphasis on team sports with more of an emphasis on the application of individual skill and knowledge and an emphasis on personal choice, lifetime activities, fitness activities, and dance. How are the benchmarks for each standard organized or grouped? Our benchmarks are organized by what we call focus areas. This slide identifies the focus areas in each of the grade bands. You'll note most of the focus areas are the same across all grade bands, except the fundamental movement skills at the elementary level that move into the application in game categories at the middle and high school levels. Are the benchmarks designed so they increase in rigor from grade level to grade level? Yes. The next few slides portray the different learning progressions built into the physical education standards. This slide portrays the K-5 learning progressions. A great activity to identify the progressions is to look at the progressions we've provided and circle verbs or concepts where you can see the progressions across grade levels. Keep in mind that these progressions represent rigor expectations we expect students to know and be able to do as they advance from grade level to grade level. Here is an example of middle school learning progressions. Again, you can circle the verbs or concepts where you can see the progressions across grade levels. This slide portrays how learning progressions advance from the elementary to the middle school levels. For example, in 5th grade, students strike with a short-handled instrument in a small-sided game. In 6th grade, this skill transfers to a 4-hand volley with control using a short-handled implement in a small-sided net and wall game practice task. This slide portrays learning progressions from middle school to high school. For example, in 8th grade, students demonstrate a movement sequence using correct rhythm and timing as an individual or in a group. High school students demonstrate competency in one or more forms of dance, such as ballroom, ballet, cultural dances, hip hop, modern, social dances, and tap. What's the best way for physical educators working together to come to reach a common agreement about the meaning of a benchmark? Deconstruction is done to help make sense of the benchmark. It's a process of identifying the defining parts of the statement that will help teachers understand the key components of the benchmark. Deconstruction helps us to understand both the different parts and the entire statement of learning. It's important here to remind you that benchmarks are not the same as lesson or unit objectives. Rather, they indicate what students must be able to do by the end of a grade level. Developing a shared understanding is a critical outcome of deconstructing benchmarks. Consensus about the intent of the benchmark is the goal. For example, we must all agree to the intent of a benchmark. Here is an example of why that's important. High school benchmark 9.1.3.1 may appear to be a physical fitness test benchmark, but it's not. It's about applying health-related fitness components to varying activities. It's also important to read the entire benchmark. For example, in 7th grade benchmark, there are actually 3 points. It's not just about dribbling with the preferred or the non-preferred hand. It has to include a change of speed and direction and occur in a variety of invasion game practice tasks. How do you deconstruct benchmarks? Here are 2 options for deconstructing a benchmark. Option 1, step 1 is to look for the content or the what, or the verb students will be doing and learning. Step 2 is to look for anything that might indicate the level of desired learning, which is the criteria. And step 3 is to look for anything that might help you determine the context in which the content and criteria might occur, and that's called the condition. A note here is that the condition may not always be present in a benchmark. Option 2 for deconstructing is step 1, identify the action required by the learner, and step 2, identify the content in the standard. The following slides provide examples of the deconstructing process. In this fourth grade benchmark, a student will throw overhand with accuracy to a moving target. The content is to throw overhand. The criteria is with accuracy, and the condition is to a moving target. In this eighth grade benchmark, students will demonstrate a moving sequence using correct rhythm and timing as an individual or in a group. The content is the movement sequence. The criteria is use correct rhythm and timing, and the condition is as an individual or in a group. A common question we get from teachers is, how in the world am I going to be able to meet all these benchmarks? Bundling is a process we introduced to help teachers manage the number of benchmarks in each grade level. This occurs after there's a solid foundation for understanding the standards, the academic language and learning progressions within them, and how to deconstruct them. Bundling helps students see connections between concepts, brings coherence to instruction, and allows more efficient use of instructional time. The curriculum can be arranged in bundles so that units of instruction can be built using approaches such as themes, authentic processes, problem-based learning, essential questions, or big ideas. Done well, integrated or bundled instruction and curriculum supports students in developing knowledge and skills in more than one standard at the same time. This is one idea of how to describe the process of bundling from the MDE Physical Education Leadership Team. The analogy for bundling is similar to making a salad. Think about benchmarks as individual ingredients in a salad, and that salads are a bundle. The number of ingredients in any salad can vary from a few to many. It's the same for bundles of benchmarks. It's not feasible, nor is it best practice to teach to one benchmark at a time. Therefore, we combine or bundle benchmarks to create cohesive chunks of content that will be taught in integrated or connected way. This is an example of a very simple third grade physical education bundle. We ask the teachers to start with benchmark in standard 1 and then find one complementary or cohesive benchmark across the remaining 4 standards. This slide shows the final product or bundle. From standard 1, students perform a variety of jumps. Add a benchmark from standard 2 while applying speed and force. Add another from standard 3 and be able to define impact of jumping of their hearts and lungs. Add another from standard 4 by working by themselves responsibly and safely. And finally, add another from standard 5 and identify what they find hard to do and what they like best. Now let's explore how to conduct a bundling activity. When you want to do this in person, go to the MnShape website in the MDE resources section. You will find bundling pages already prepared for you. Print out each standard on different colors of paper. This makes it easier for sorting. Then cut apart all the standards and benchmarks for each grade level into strips and place them in a separate envelope for each grade level. Have teachers work together to create bundles across all the standards. Lay out all the benchmarks on the table by color-coded standards area. Ask teachers to start with standard 1 and identify a common theme across all 5 standards. It may be helpful to identify an example activity that can apply to that bundle or activity. This slide shows the example for the jump rope bundle mentioned earlier, color-coded by the standard with the jump roping identified as the activity. What's the next step after bundling? Write a performance outcome for the bundle. Performance outcomes describe what students will be able to do after learning the content of the benchmarks within the bundle. A performance outcome shares the key characteristic of accurately measuring one or more specific course standards. A key feature is that a performance outcome requires students to produce an end result. This could be a report, a performance, or an experiment. This is then scored against a set of criteria. A performance outcome measures a student's ability to apply the skills and knowledge learned from a unit or units of study. The overall idea is that it closely mirrors real-life scenarios. This slide shows an example of a performance outcome for the jump rope bundle displayed earlier in this presentation. The bolded portions draw attention to the content of the benchmarks, but what is also important is that the performance outcome is written so that it's easy to understand how a student would meet this outcome. Students will use correct force and speed to perform 5 different jump rope tricks chosen from a set of 10 options, including jumps of varying levels of difficulty. They will use these experiences to create their own definition of cardiorespiratory fitness and recognize the effects of consecutive jumping has on the heart and lungs. They will demonstrate responsible behaviors by remaining on task and following the safety protocols, and they will reflect on their personal experiences with challenge and enjoyment. How do we write a performance outcome? Here are some key steps in writing a performance outcome. Using the bundled benchmarks, articulate what students will be able to do after learning the content in these benchmarks. Next, select a physical activity that can be applied to the bundle. Think about how to accurately measure the student's ability to apply the skills and knowledge learned in one or more specific benchmarks identified in the bundle. Determine an end result that closely mirrors real-life scenarios. Please note that each bundle can have multiple performance outcomes and can be adjusted to a student's knowledge, skill level, and ability. Here's a middle school example. Remember, the performance outcome articulates what students will be able to do after learning the content in these benchmarks. First, select a theme and identify a physical activity that can be applied to the bundle. For this performance outcome, the theme is outdoor pursuits, and cross-country skiing is the example activity. Next, we think about how to accurately measure the student's ability to apply the skills and knowledge learned in one or more specific benchmarks identified in the bundle. So we identify those measures and skills and tactics. And finally, we want to make sure the end result that closely mirrors real-life scenarios. This performance outcome is that students will describe the 10 basic skills and tactics identified in class needed for participation in cross-country skiing and demonstrate 5 of those basic skills on a cross-country course while using the equipment and facilities appropriately and safely. They will describe how the weather or level of difficulty due to the conditions or ability affects their participation to ensure the safety of themselves and others. This performance outcome was adapted from the OPEN, or the Online Physical Education Network, at the high school level. The Standard 1 benchmark calls for competency in 2 lifetime activity categories. This performance outcome partially meets this benchmark. The lifetime activity category identified is individual performance with the example activity of Tai Chi. Using the steps defined earlier, this performance outcome is that students will consistently perform the entire Juvu Kata with proper alignment and balance while displaying an understanding of the movement concepts embedded within the movement. They are able to perform one stress management strategy and can explain how the stress management technique can reduce stress and affect health. Students will conduct himself or herself safely and with the consideration of others while exhibiting proper etiquette and communication and provide an analysis of the health benefits of Tai Chi. The next question to ask is, how do we know if students have achieved the benchmarks in the performance outcome? This is where assessment comes in. The purpose of assessment is to provide evidence of student learning and student achievement towards outcomes and standards. Teachers can use them to plan for future instruction, provide feedback to students, formalize the observation process, and document program effectiveness. There are many types and categories of assessments. For review of assessments, please review the assessment video in our professional development series. How do we grade a performance outcome? First, it's important to identify how grades are utilized. The primary purpose of a grade is to report the achievement of a student to external audiences, such as communicating to parents, administrators, college officials, and students themselves, the degree to which a student achieved learning goals. Performance during the school year, represented by grades, is also utilized to determine whether secondary students earn credit towards graduation requirements. Employers use grades to indicate the competence of potential employees. Grades can be used to sort students into more advanced classes. Colleges use GPAs as a predictor of student success in higher education. The practice of grading can be driven by school policy and expectations. The bottom line is that students learn best from ongoing assessments during their coursework. For more information on grading, please review the grading video in the professional development series. Can you provide an example of assessing and grading a performance outcome? Sure. Let's take the third grade jump rope performance outcome identified earlier and apply potential ways to assess it. First, are there benchmarks that can be grouped or assessed together? In this case, yes. We will combine two of them. 3.1.3.16, perform a variety of jump rope skills, and 3.2.1.3, apply effort, awareness, concepts of speed and force. Next, we determine what part of the performance outcome is being assessed. For this, we identify students will use correct force and speed to perform 5 different jump rope tricks chosen from a set of 10 options, and then identify what those options are. Finally, we identify the assessment tool, and we will use a student jump rope performance rubric. Here's a picture of what the potential jump rope rubric might look like. We are using a 3-point rubric for both benchmarks. It is critically important the scoring criteria in the rubric be clearly defined right up front and shared with the student. They need to know what developing, competent, and proficient look like. Going back to the performance assessment, determine the next benchmark for assessment. This time we choose benchmark 3.3.3.1, define cardiorespiratory fitness, and provide examples of physical activities that can enhance cardiorespiratory fitness. The part of the performance outcome being assessed is that students will use these experiences to create their own definition of cardiorespiratory fitness and recognize the effects consecutive jumping has on the heart and lungs, and will reflect on their personal experiences with challenge and enjoyment. The assessment tool will be a student worksheet. Here is what the student worksheet could look like. Again, it is important that the teacher identify the criteria of a rating of a 1, 2, or 3. This can be done during class or outside of class. Going back to the performance outcome, what are the remaining benchmarks to be assessed? Can they be combined in one assessment tool? For this situation, yes. We will combine benchmark 3.4.1.1, work independently, exhibit responsibility, and 3.4.5.1, move safely using equipment in general space with minimal reminders. The part of the performance outcome being assessed is that students will demonstrate respectful behaviors by remaining on task and following the safety protocols. The assessment tool is a teacher observation checklist. Here is a sample teacher observation checklist. The scoring guide identifies that students should have multiple opportunities to exhibit each of the 3 behaviors. When a teacher observes the behavior, a student receives an X. This slide summarizes all the assessment tools utilized in the unit for each student. It can be shared with students accompanied by the details of their scores for each assessment. Now let's address grading the unit. Grading should be an exercise in professional judgment, not the widespread practice of simply averaging a set of scores. Physical educators should analyze the body of evidence and determine, not just calculate, grades. Avoid using the mean. Consider using the median or mode. Extreme scores, particularly a 0, have a profound effect on averaging. The mean may not provide an accurate description of what a student really knows and can do. Teachers should also consider weighting components carefully to achieve the intent of the final grades. The weight in which achievement results are combined generally involves weighting the different learning targets in order to reflect this intent. Here's a summary of guidelines for standards-based grading. Relate grading procedures to standards. Use criteria and reference performance standards to determine grades. Limit factors included in grades to achievement. Sample student performance. Do not use all scores in grades. Keep records so they can be changed and updated regularly. Crunch numbers carefully. Avoid using the mean. Consider using the medium or mode. Use quality assessments and properly record evidence of achievement. Discuss and involve students in grading. Are there free online resources available to help with standard implementation? Yes. As you put together your annual plan for implementation, I highly suggest you utilize these free online resources. Shape America Professional Development, the Online Physical Education Network, or OPEN, and Dynamic PE ASAP. All these sites are credible and utilize the national standards and outcomes in all their sample units. But please note that because they utilize the national standards and outcomes, you will need to adapt them to meet Minnesota benchmarks. When modules are written in grade level bands, such as primary, intermediate, and middle school and high school, you'll need to identify individual grade level benchmarks. These sites are also helpful as that they often include module block plans, material lists, teaching cues, student cues, academic language, lesson plans, and assessments. What's next in the standard implementation process? We will look at the next 4 components essential in the implementation process. They are policy and environment, curriculum, appropriate instruction, and assessment. Tune in on each second Thursday of the month for the content covered in these areas. Thank you for listening to this review video on standard implementation. Tune in next month as we discuss the next concept in the standard implementation policy, which is in the next implementation process, which is policy and environment. I again encourage you all to utilize the available resources available to you on both the MDE and MnShape websites. These videos are intended to assist you on your standard implementation journey. I wish you all good health and happy teaching.